Hello and welcome to the April 2021 Cox Business Cloud Streams live event. This is an exclusive series of discussions we have geared to helping companies overcome common IT challenges they contend with and streamline operations so IT teams can focus on increasing business efficiency and becoming drivers of business success. I'm Chris Piedaminici. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager for Cox Business Cloud Solutions. And my partner in crime for today is Andy Fernandez, the Senior Product Marketing Manager at Zerto. Our topic du jour is the inevitability of IT downtime and what organizations can do to be ready for that day. Just a little bit of a reminder before we jump into our discussion here. Want to let everybody know that our session is being recorded and will be shared afterwards. So feel free to post questions that you have as we go in the Q&A panel, and we'll answer those at the end. Also wanted to kind of informally poll those in the audience we have today. What are some of your DR challenges that you have right now? So feel free to post that also in the Q&A, and we'll address that as we go. So let's get started here. So backup is not disaster recovery. Probably seems like a little bit of a bold statement, but surprisingly enough, we find that a lot of organizations have the misconception that backup equates to a full DR strategy. And the reality is that backup alone just really does not cover the average company's recovery needs, particularly when you're talking about things like critical business data, applications, VMs, and so forth. In this session, Andy and I are going to walk through some of the common challenges that we see organizations facing, both from the managed service provider standpoint here at Cox Business, as well as what the folks at Zerto see in their kind of business travels. We're also going to address some key use cases for why adding disaster recovery as a service is a strong thing that most organizations should be doing, and what a full DR strategy looks like, at least from a topical perspective. So Andy, would you say I'm crazy for saying that backup is not DR as a comprehensive solution?
Absolutely not. So, coming from Zerto, we are one single cloud data management protection platform, right? What that means is we deliver backup, we deliver DR, and we even see that as we solve for backup, we try not to do it in the way that backup technology approaches. And the reason that is because of snapshots. And we'll get into that later on, but we could safely say that from our perspective, from our customers and everyone that we speak to in the industry, using periodic reactive backup technology for DR is not going to deliver what you need now, and it's especially not going to deliver the future as well. So with that, if we stick to the slide before, I did want to touch on some of the challenges that we're seeing. And I think some of the folks in this webinar are going to be the first who are able to see this. And this is from our new State of Data Protection and Disaster Recovery report that was surveyed and sponsored by Zerto with IDC. So what we did is we asked IDC to take a look at over 500 IT pros, from system administrators, DR, backup admins, all the way to CIOs and CTOs. And in the DR section, we asked them, really, what are the biggest challenges your organization faces? Not just you, but your organization. And it really falls in line every single year with the same key pain points. We know and we understand that there is a personnel situation, whether it's you don't have enough people in the organization who have the ability to through and through, end to end, execute on a disaster recovery plan, or you have people who are not used to the new technology that you have to use, whether that's cloud-based or even new hardware that you have to manage. The next thing that we talked about, obviously, was time and availability. Some of these, especially legacy DR solution, anything on-premise, introduces a lot of maintenance, a lot of management, and a lot of resources that are required to maintain, to run, and to execute. The third thing that we see, and this is across the board with backup and DR, are SLAs, like your RPOs, how much data loss are you seeing? What are you expecting versus actually being able to deliver? And then how long is it actually taking you to recover your critical data as an organization? We see other things there around testing, around total cost of ownership that are very important. But at the end of the day, what's very common across most organizations is we don't have enough people, we don't have enough time, and we're not getting our data back quick enough, and we're not getting enough data back, right? That would be my summary of all of these. And Chris, I know that you wanted to cover the next one where we actually talked a little bit about one specific driver of the need for better SLAs, of the need for more expertise, which is ransomware.
Yeah, I would say that those three are definitely very common with what we see folks adopting DRaaS as a means to fully flesh out their DR strategy and make sure that they're ready in the inevitable event that that downtime occurs.
Absolutely. You know, we deal with so many prospects who have come to us because they have had a ransomware incident, or even customers who say, you know, before Zerto, we were using backup to recover from ransomware. We didn't realize that we could use DR to do so, especially because a lot of these ransomware attacks, it's not just an encryption of a file load through. They're encrypting entire applications, entire sites, data centers. And so we really have to look at the success that these criminal syndicates have had, right? And we like to put it into two categories. You have the high volume, almost ransomware as a service type of situation where you get everything from SMB to the enterprise's attack, broad strokes. But then you also get much more targeted types of attack, whether it's government-backed or independent, for healthcare institutions, hospitals, education, law enforcement. They're all being attacked, and they're all being attacked successfully because they know, one, they have critical data that they need to recover, but two, that they don't have the means to actually recover it quickly and not have data loss. So we're seeing ransomware go from a usual backup scenario to something that is required within your DR solution, especially when it comes to those tier 1, tier 2 critical applications in your environment.
Right. Yeah, I mean, a good example of that to my mind is a very well-known GPS provider that had a massive breach back in August, I think it was, and they were down for nearly a week before they had some of their critical applications back up.
Absolutely. And if you just think about the nature of backup, you're taking a daily copy, and in that daily copy, that is your resort to recover from an encryption. Now, let's say that you get lucky, that you have the protocols and the detection software to understand exactly when you've been encrypted. Even if your backup restore works correctly, you're already seeing an inherent data loss of hours, right? Anything from 4 to 12 hours of data loss. And that's assuming that you're able to recover. That's one aspect, right? That's RPO, that's your recovery point objective. But what about your RTO? Right. When you have to recover from an incremental on these applications, most organizations, you see them rebuilding file directories for weeks at a time just to be able to get those applications up and running, which I know kind of tails in exactly to what you wanted to discuss now, Chris, which is why that backup technology is just not sufficient at all, right, for data protection, but also for DR specific mission critical applications.
Yep. Yeah, that's definitely key for organizations that do have those critical data points, the critical VMs, particularly when they're, you know, staggered across multiple servers and things of that nature, that you just cannot get back to operations using traditional backup methodologies.
Exactly. And if you think about it, I think the easiest way to position this is backup is only used in scenarios of data loss. It is a reactive technology. It cannot be used for anything proactive. And half of the DR scenarios that we're seeing are proactive scenarios. Whether you're in the East Coast and you anticipate a hurricane coming your way, you can proactively migrate, move, or fail over to another data center before anything even gets close. You can't do that within a backup environment, right? If in the West Coast, we've had customers who've had and anticipated the wildfires coming their way, and they've been able to proactively fail over to a secondary site to a service provider or the public cloud. And at the end of the day, if you have an outage on your primary data center and no warm site available, it doesn't matter if everything's backed up, you can't be up and running. So it just shows you kind of the inherent flaws of the technology. People have approached it because of TCO, because they already know backup. But at the end of the day, you need to expect more from your DR than just traditional snapshot-based backup.
Yeah, and I think it's also worthwhile considering that in today's context of how we're seeing senior executives in organizations, that they're now having some sort of a level of responsibility from a job perspective, but also potentially even from a compensation perspective, where if they have a massive downtime event and they're not ready to have applications and data back up in a relatively short space of time, their job kind of is at stake now as a result of that.
Absolutely. It's an interesting approach. We're seeing less patience, less tolerance for downtime, and that is reflecting in those positions, right? And we've talked about for the basics, like what are the challenges with DR? Why can't you use backup? But the other really important question is an infrastructure question, right? Should I continue? If I even have, let's say I do have a DR solution, should I move from an on-premise to the cloud, right? That's the decision we have to make now, with to cloud or not to cloud. And it's really interesting to go through that thought process. So this is a really interesting quote from Gartner, and we've done a lot of research. Obviously, Zerto, we're a software that helps replicates that service providers use to deliver DRaaS, and so we're always very interested to see how the cloud performs. And if you think about, we've all been bombarded with emails and marketing about COVID and pandemic resilience and all these things, but at the end of the day, we saw a lot of organizations have to move forcefully to the cloud, whether because they needed digital services, they needed more infrastructure reliability, or they couldn't even access their data center. The cloud we saw a surge, and it was stress tested. And for the most part, it performed. So, we used to see a lot of prospects and customers who had, a 5-year cloud plan. They're going to move their operations. They did it in a year. It was a catalyst. And I'm sure, Chris, you can
Right.
attest to that, of your customers that are immediately driving towards your services because they need to.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that, thanks to COVID and other changes in the IT industry, it metaphorically lit a fire under people's behinds to, accelerate that roadmap that they may have had a much longer time frame to starting to transition their critical infrastructure to the cloud, and things of that nature, that they had to do it. They had to trust the cloud worked. And I would say by and large, like you indicated, cloud kind of came through, as a shining star.
Absolutely. And, that kind of puts us into the decision, right? Because you also don't want to have a blind plan as, we got to go to the cloud. Let's pay some people to go to the cloud. Let's see what that means. You got to really evaluate what type of organization you are, your cost structure, and what type of services you're trying to unlock. Because you have a lot of decisions, right? You can do the public cloud. You can do something like VMware on the public cloud, or you can use a service provider, which always has so many specific benefits. But before you even make that decision, you have to figure out, do I want, and this is assuming that you have a DR environment already, you have to realize and understand all of the costs behind maintaining a secondary site. Everything from related to your facility, all of the additional costs related to maintaining a facility, both from a utility perspective, the hardware itself, the software required to run and execute on that hardware, but also the solutions to be able to perform disaster recovery and backup. That's not considering labor, it's not considering time, and it's not considering resources. So it's really important to identify all of your cost areas. And usually that happens a lot when you're facing a hardware refresh, but it's important to do that before. And these are all critical things that you have to consider to understand, do we want an OpEx model? Do we want to pay for consumption versus fixed costs? And how do we want to approach that? Once you have this understanding, it's going to open a lot of doors to you to really understand what makes the most sense, and that you can come with a plan to a service provider like Cox that is able to deliver that.
Yeah, it's those are great points, Andy. I think that a lot of organizations, they conceptually have those things in the back of their mind as they consider DR, and as they consider, looking at DRaaS solutions to help them out. But I think they get a better appreciation for that, at least from what we've seen here, as they start to map those things out.
Absolutely.
So I think that kind of brings us naturally to the characteristics that we see here on the service provider side, and I'm sure it's probably very similar to what you guys see on the solution provider side, of the types of characteristics that organizations have that are, at some stage perhaps of moving to their DR to the cloud. From our perspective here at Cox Business, we see that the organizations finding a wealth of benefits that they get from making that transition. One of the big ones is the ability of DRaaS to help ease challenges that IT personnel have, in managing the physical on-prem architecture of some of the other methodologies for accomplishing DR. And that kind of goes alongside that. We see a fair amount of organizations, they have varying degrees of DR experience, and leveraging a managed cloud service provider can be a great way for them to supplement not just the experience of their IT team, and give them an additional resource for how to achieve that correctly. But can even be a resource for organizations that want to say, you know what, we've got so many other projects on our plate, we'd like to hand this off to you guys, can you manage it for us, sort of thing.
Absolutely, right. Oh, my apologies.
Oh, no, go ahead. Feel free to interject there.
Yeah, no, you have such a point, because one of the things that we see, and we talk to our customers, in the past they had like a separate DR solution. Let's say they used like an array-based replication, so they required like homogeneous storage, but they also had an appliance for backup. And now, but this is all designed because they, as a team, wanted to do it themselves. So now you are maintaining the hardware, two different solutions. So you have to learn to get certified in completely two different types of technology to essentially be able to recover, right? And then essentially to effectively install, to do it right, you still have to bring on professional services. So you could have done all of that using a service provider that includes that for you with the expertise, and without you actually having to execute on all of these things and be knowledgeable and continue keeping up on disparate technologies. And I know that that's a specific pain point that you guys solve for.
Yeah, that's definitely a big aspect of why some organizations, will leverage us beyond just how they find that that DRaaS is a great way to shorten the workload around DR work, where you can create VMs, replicate those VMs, and when a disaster strikes, restore them quickly. Then much more so than the physical devices that you might find in a typical on-prem environment, but also that you're not having to deal with those different solutions, and kind of juggling how that all fits into the greater mix of things. But particularly also, I think it parallels nicely because it simplifies all of the resource allocation from a time perspective, but also just the architecture perspective, for lack of a better way to describe it. And then you have the aspects of where organizations will oftentimes, in a physical on-premises environment, irrespective of aspects like costs and such, find that they don't have the inherent flexibility and elasticity to deploy DR in a physical environment, where the cloud offers them that flexibility to scale as they need to, much faster and much more appropriately as their needs change, whether their DR needs accelerate and move up volumetrically or whether it reduces, sort of thing.
Absolutely. One of the things that we consider as well is you need a specific process. You can't just know, oh, we have a cloud mandate, let's go to the cloud. You need to have a process, not just from a financial perspective or operational, but the technology as well. And that's really interesting that we see a lot of our customers use DR and use backup as baby steps to say, let's move some workloads over to the cloud and protect them there. And then let's see how that works. Let's see the value, and then let's continue and then they add services like SaaS, right? And then they get into a cloud in the enterprise application development world. So these are all important baby steps and important steps to take in moving those operations over. Maybe not everything at the same time, but at least your DR and maybe then your backup. And that gives you an insight into a foot in the door into the value of the world of the cloud. And really, Chris, this falls in perfectly to the cost benefit analysis and the thought process that you have to have of an organization that's like, okay, we have these characteristics. We know that we want to move DR to the cloud, but now do we do it ourselves with a public cloud like an Azure or an AWS or Google, or do we go with a service provider? So it's really interesting to see some of those characteristics as well that we'll probably see on the next slide. Perfect. Yeah. And so this is kind of another analyst report from Gartner, and they talked about what were the reasons that people opted not to use the public cloud, but to use a managed service provider, a cloud service provider. And it was around the same challenges as we saw that organizations of all sizes had with DR, specifically DR on premises, right? So it's you were limited to backup, right? Using tape and disk. That's the third one we see. You needed to improve your SLAs, specifically your RPOs and RTOs, but also didn't have the staff to be able to do this. If you think about it, using the public cloud is not going to eliminate the resources and education needed to execute this on your own. You still have to learn this technology. You have to understand how Azure, AWS, or Google works, and then you have to still execute on those DR operations, where that's still the same problem that you had on premise, but now you just have it in the cloud. So if that's something that is a specific pain point, it's really important to consider a service provider who can improve the SLAs, reduce time, resources, and labor, and then also give you a proper DR solution, not your original tape and disk that you would use, your 3-2-1 rule, that just is not fit for DR.
Right.
And that really follows a few more of the other pain points that we saw. For example, testing, cost. Some organizations really just had a 5-year refresh, and they go, oh, we don't want to do this. Let's just move now before we have to commit to 5-year costs and then deal with depreciating hardware and facility as well. So it's really important to understand why people are doing this, to know, does this make sense for us?
Exactly. I think that's oftentimes one of the biggest aspects of what organizations are wrestling with, is they're looking at adding DRaaS to their portfolio to make that step towards a full DR strategy. Is how much does it make sense, and what level of it makes sense for my organization.
Absolutely.
So I think that that naturally brings up the aspects of where organizations that we talk to are looking for that assistance, in where managed cloud service provider like us can be something that alleviates a significant weight off their shoulders, where they have they know they need to do this, but they're not sure how to go about charting that path, for lack of a better way to describe it, to reach a fully comprehensive DR strategy. Be it like what you talked about, how they don't have the expertise in the cloud platforms, or they don't have a deep knowledge base about what that encompasses to start implementing a DRaaS solution, and where they can leverage the resources that a mature cloud provider can help them with. One of the probably the most salient points that we often hear people, kind of reiterating back to us is the need for those dedicated resources. They don't have the people internally in the organization that can always be there around the clock to address a downtime event, for example, where an organization like Cox Business Cloud, we have industry leading support experts that are available for those folks that either in conjunction with their IT team can, jump on the incident as it occurs, or even be that resource by which the IT team can say, we have a downtime, you guys saw it, can you help us get things back up? This is what we need to get done, sort of thing. And that goes along with the years of experience we have helping companies just to do that sort of thing. But beyond that, I think from a resource standpoint is the ability that organizations can then say, okay, we're getting our DR strategy going. We need to tie that into the other cloud solution, so that as part of the onboarding of a DRaaS solution, that we can help tie them into the other cloud solutions that they might be leveraging. And along the way, we also can sit there and strategize with them to understand what their unique IT landscapes are, so that we can help them build out that strategy that fits, their unique needs from an architecture standpoint, based on what kind of a schedule that they have, that they need to be covering all of their resources in their environment. And, then they can also look at leveraging aspects of, okay, I know I need to be doing this. Here's what I need to do. What are my target platforms? So they can even go so far as, if they're interested, leveraging our cloud platform as a convenient, cost-effective target for them in their replication needs, to even go so far as to scale elastically, beyond what they might look at with an Azure or an AWS or even a Google, so that they can meet that 3-2-1 best practice methodology. And a big part of that too is, as they're looking to build that strategy, they got to look at what does that DR strategy look like, and building towards that mature BCDR approach, so that they lean on us to help them understand, okay, we've done the analysis, what's next? And that, that comes with the building the run book, or some people call it the playbook, so that exactly what that DR strategy is going to look like when the downtime occurs, what you need to do, A, B, C, D, and so on. And even do the aspects of helping organizations that probably, if they had some sort of a DR strategy in place, many organizations really are not going through and doing the regular tests that are necessary for that healthy strategy to be effective in the event of a downtime. And then, refining that along the way. Do you see that paralleling in your side of things as well, Andy?
Yeah, absolutely. It's crucial to really, when you think about as an infrastructure and an operations organization, right? IT, backup, DR, these things are extremely critical, but they're also reactive. And you have other responsibilities, other things that are coming into your organization, whether it's to solidify current digital services or help build out new ones, accelerate application development, really service the organization and provision revenue versus being a cost center. It shows you that the priorities around DR and backup should be around reducing the time, the resource, the cost of it. And that's an important strategic discussion. That's when, we utilize like the digital transformation buzzword. But another really important thing to dive into, as Chris mentioned, all of these aspects, is there's a very big difference between having a DR solution and then going and pressing the button when something happens versus having an actual DR plan, a strategy, a run book, and the ability to do this end to end, right? DR works hand in hand with business continuity. And when you perform one of these tests, you have to just make sure that not only was the failover executed, but that it was done well, that was done with the SLAs that are required of the organization, and that every aspect that is required was tested. You know, we see a lot of, for example, with backup, if you try to test something, you are going to have an impact on your production environment. I mean, you already have an impact on your production environment just having a copy of that data, let alone a test. So it's really important to have that knowledge or that expectation so that when you go to a service provider, you understand what they're able to deliver you of added value, not only just on the solution and the infrastructure, but on the resilience side, that you're not recovering from an incident and exceeding unplanned downtime, but that you're just resuming operations. And Chris, everything you mentioned goes hand in hand with what we see and what we are advised our own prospects, customers, and providers around disaster recovery.
And I think there's also too the aspect that organizations can benefit from leveraging a provider like us is if they're looking to offload responsibilities because their IT teams are already strained, to the max. That's where we can help step in and give them alleviate that workload where they're not having to deal with the maintenance of all of the aspects of a full DR strategy and the admin costs that would go along with, from a time perspective and obviously a budget perspective, the more traditional physical on-prem aspects of recovery.
Absolutely.
Let alone the aspect of.
Oh, apologies.
Go ahead. Sorry.
So apologies. So think of the scenario that we talked about originally, right? You talked about ransomware when we talk about it as a DR perspective. Yes, there's the resources, which is one of the most important things about being able to use a service provider, but also just think of that pain point, that experience. You have your environment encrypted. You're already facing data loss. You're using a backup solution to be able to recover. So you already go through the stress of a failed restore or the potential of a failed restore. But just the amount of time, whether that's days or weeks for especially large enterprises or even GPS organizations that won't be named, Chris, as you mentioned, it's the amount of time that you're dedicating to risk mitigation and recovering from a disaster after the disaster already happened versus being able to solve for it, mitigate the risk. It's what Accenture calls a bend, don't break approach. Like, this is coming, have a solution that allows you to do this quickly versus going through that very messy, very painful weeks period post-attack that we see that really puts companies behind in their own initiatives as well. So it's another aspect to consider, just that user experience when it comes to doing it yourself versus using the expertise and the vast resources of a solutions provider or a service provider.
Right. And it's interesting too, I can think of an instance where I talked to an organization that beyond all of those type of factors, one of their biggest challenges related to DR was not just the recovery aspect of things, but also they acquired a number of companies in a short space of time, and they found out very quickly that continuing to use a heavy on-premise approach to their recovery needs just was not going to be remotely cost effective for them. So they looked to us to say, hey, we need to scale this not only quickly, but also breaking, a tight IT budget. And that's where, we assisted them in helping them leverage that ability at a cost effective aspect of things beyond, not taxing their IT team with trying to build out a larger on-premises environment for making sure that they have that coverage in the ideal perspective.
Absolutely. Just think of that simple inherited, what I would like to call a data protection stack. We see prospects come in and they have 2 backup providers, 3 types of DR for different colos that they have, and it just becomes a mess. And that's where the priority is to consolidate that entire experience, because as we said, resource is key, especially now more than ever. And one of the important things is to understand is, well, we understand that resources are important. Having these experts, these cloud providers being able to deliver this like Cox and being able to say, let's run you through your testing, let's help you fail over, let's manage this infrastructure. But also what type of DR solution is being used. That's another important piece. That's kind of that next step of what are we requiring now, right? Because there are different types that still come with pitfalls.
And that's a beautiful segue into why Zerto?
Surprise, surprise, right? So with Zerto, right, we're a cloud data management and protection platform, a lot of use cases. But at our core, where we differentiated ourselves from the beginning and established market leadership, was in disaster recovery. We deliver the best RPOs of seconds and RTOs of minutes. We've taken every single DR and data protection operation or experience or recovery to restore scenario into just a couple of clicks. Whether you want to fail over entire data center or a very large, complex, dependent multi-VM application, or even a single server, you're able to do that. You're able to do it consistently, right? We have REIP technology, boot ordering. We have the recovery scripts. It's API enabled, so you can even, as a large enterprise, consolidate even more. But one of the important pieces as well is that we work together to be able to deliver the actual automated reporting that you need. You don't want to just have a DR test and say, all right, it worked, we failed it over, but you want data. You want data as to what were my SLAs, how did it work? If there was an anomaly, how do we fix this, right? Those are really important things. It's not just about the solution, but it's about the process and documentation as well. But at the end of the day, at the heart of what we try to do is deliver the best SLAs, but minimize the amount of time that it takes to do so. So if we go to the next slide, we'll see kind of I gift our user experience for a failover, because it's that easy. It doesn't require a full demo. It's simply you just select the applications. They're all in one single stack. For example, let's say you have an SAP application with multiple VMs that correspond to it. You create that and you designate all the VMs to that application. So you're treating them consistently as one unit. Select that application, select the point in time that you want to recover, and then start the failover. And that's it, right? That is the entire user experience, the entire requirement to be able to do this. And that same simplicity applies to testing, right? So if we look at some of the Zerto differentiations in the next slide, it's very clear why it's important to know what type of DRaaS solution am I using, because you've recognized the value of Cox and their services, but what are they actually using as a platform to run this? And our foundation, we lead and innovate continuous data protection. We're not an appliance. This is software only to deliver a very fast recovery experience with seconds of data loss. We're talking about using change block tracking and near synchronous replication that allows you to simply observe changes every couple of seconds and then recover to those previously, all via a journaling technology. We talked about hybrid cloud here. It doesn't matter where we sit. We work extremely well with managed service providers, so there's no disruption there. It's a simple experience. It's just we're a piece of software that replicates that data, and somebody like Cox is able to come in and just give you the SLAs that you require. And at the heart of it, the way that we've orchestrated it, it's just simplicity at scale. Anything that you need to do should only be a couple of clicks. It should not require that much more. We know your time is precious, but we also know that your data is precious. And that's really all encompassing is what the Zerto platform does. It's different, but what Cox is running under the engine for disaster recovery.
Yeah, I think one thing I would add to that too, Andy, is one of the reasons why we leverage Zerto, and I think our clients have echoed this, is not just the simplicity of the, relatively speaking, simplicity of the application, but particularly the ability to see at a quick glance, you know, all of the resources that they have covered, so they can, you know, kind of go through quickly, and if something, the downtime event occurs, they can go through and say, okay, I have these VMs set up for this critical application that just went down. Here's what I need to do to bring that application back up.
Exactly. Well put.
And then, as you know, as you so kindly alluded to, is as a managed cloud service provider, we have a range of cloud solutions that can easily be leveraged by organizations that are looking to deploy DRaaS as a means to better protect themselves. And that goes beyond the aspects of having a target platform like our cloud platform to replicate their environment too. In today's world, where all of these IT folks are being constrained to do so many things, they need to simplify and consolidate. And that's where, we love having conversations with folks for how can we help you do that? Are you having challenges in other areas of your IT landscape where you might be looking to expand your edge platform, where you might want to deploy an SD-WAN solution, or your old backup solutions aren't working quite the way they used to for you as part of building that DR strategy? Can help you leverage an additional solution there and tying in, that deployment to the cloud across other solutions that we have in our stack, as well as just they may be looking to consolidate more traditional transport aspects, where all of the networking solutions that we have in our portfolio can be something that they can leverage to consolidate all of the resources they have and improve their business efficiency. So that kind of rounds out our discussion for today, and we're pretty close on time here. So I think we can kind of pivot over to the question and answer session and see what people have in store for questions.
Hey guys, great discussion. We do have a couple of questions. One is, what hypervisors do you support?
Yeah, I can take that one.
Andy?
Absolutely. From the Zerto platform, we work across hypervisors. So whether you want to use vSphere or Hyper-V, there's no change in performance or usage.
Awesome. What's the difference between an array-based replication and Zerto's replication?
Absolutely. So essentially, if you think about array-based replication, what it requires homogeneous storage. Your recover point for VMs, for recover point classic, you essentially need a second on-premises site with the same infrastructure for it to work. Zerto, we're just software, and you choose the target site that you want to use. So we deliver those RPOs as seconds using near synchronous replication, but it doesn't matter what location you want. We're not at the storage level, we're at the hypervisor level. So you get to optimize, for example, choosing a service provider to replicate to their site.
Perfect. How does Zerto ensure that the consistent recovery of multi-VM applications?
Yeah, I briefly covered it. Essentially, we have what we call a virtual protection group, and you designate all of the VMs that belong to that application in this virtual protection group. You give it a name, you give it its policies, what are the SLAs that you want. So when it comes to recovering that application, you recover all of the VMs at the exact same checkpoint versus having to find the common denominator VMs on these dependency chains that you get with incremental jobs. This is application-centric recovery, one-click recovery for your entire application.
Awesome. We'll wrap up with this last question. I think you had already went over it, but just to remind us, is Zerto a hardware-based or software-based?
Yeah, so we're not just software defined as backup appliances like to call themselves. We're true software. It's a low overhead installation at your hypervisor level that works anywhere. So it's a very simple, very lean, very agile solution.
And naturally also very scalable as well to whatever your environmental needs are, compared to solutions that are more hardware centric. That scalability may be inherently much more limited.
Absolutely.
Perfect. And that's all the questions that we have.
So that kind of wraps things up for our CloudStream session today. Wanted to thank Andy for joining in this discussion with me. I enjoyed it thoroughly, Andy, and naturally always appreciate the excellent expertise that you bring to the table. and want to thank everybody that attended today for listening into our conversation, and hopefully it was illuminating for everybody that's somewhere in their journey for potentially deploying a DRaaS solution. If you'd like to get more information after our session, please don't hesitate to visit our website at coxbusiness.com/DRaaS, and as well as join our LinkedIn group for additional questions and answers that you folks might be looking to get answered.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Take care.
Bye, everyone.